Hello. Unfortunately today I'm on a bit of a downer because we're talking about my most disappointing reads from 2019. I did read some incredible books and I am pleased to say that I did struggle to put together a list of 10 most disappointing reads, not because I struggled to narrow it down, but because I struggled to figure out which books disappointed me the most. So this very much is a disappointing reads video and not a books I didn't like video, because the vast majority of these I would have liked under other circumstances, and I'll explain a little bit of why as I discuss each book. But I do want to start with a book that is my absolute least favourite of the year. I only gave it 1 star and I would go so far as to say that I hated it. I pushed myself to read it. I shouldn't have. I should have DNF'd it. I didn't. I'm going to try and be better at that in 2020. But that book is The Near Witch by Victoria Schwab, which I actually read before it was relaunched this year. It's Victoria Schwab's first ever published novel, and it went out of print and then was relaunched this year because of just how popular Victoria Schwab has become. And I don't begrudge her that at all, because we all start somewhere, don't we? And if I didn't like her first book, then that's no big deal, but I really did not like this one. It is set in a town where children start to go missing, and there is a hunt for these children, and various characters in the book have various ideas about who is responsible for this. Keeping it spoiler free, there's a lot of repetition, there are a lot of double standards, there are a lot of problematic elements within the pages that are never discussed or dealt with or even acknowledged as problems, which I personally have difficulty with because this is supposed to be a middle grade book, and I wouldn't want even a young teenager to read this book because they wouldn't identify a lot of these problematic elements, and they shouldn't be going around thinking that these things are okay. And I don't want to go into the detail because I don't want to spoil the book. There are a lot of people who really enjoyed the whimsical nature of this story, and that's really great, especially if a lot of those readers are adults, because they'll notice the problems and acknowledge that those problems are there and ignore them on the basis that they are in one of Schwab's earliest works, in fact her first published work, and see past those issues. I just couldn't. And if you want more detailed thoughts on that, then feel free to discuss with me down in the comments. Just let me know so that I can make sure that it's labelled that there are going to be spoilers. But this is the one book that I truly hated this year. There's one other book on this list that I don't own a copy of, and that is The Sin Eater's Daughter by Melinda Salisbury. I borrowed this book from the library and I didn't like it enough to want to buy a copy. What it is about is a girl who has sort of been adopted into the royal family because she is a goddess reborn, and the way that we know that she's a goddess reborn is because the people that she touches die of a horrible disease. Her touch is poisonous, and that premise sounded really interesting to me, but sadly the story itself didn't really deliver on that premise, in my opinion. I was expecting something really dark, and what I got was a slightly fantastical romance story, and I do like romance, and I do like romance in fantasy. I just don't want you to sell me that book as fantasy. Sell it to me as romance and I'll probably like it. But if you're trying to pretend to be a fantasy novel when really you're just a romance novel, that just grates on my nerves, and so this was a bit disappointing for me for that reason. Then we have a middle grade title. This is Twice Magic by Cressida Cowell. This is book 2 in the Wizards of Once series. I read book 1 earlier on in the year and really loved it. I felt like it dealt with some really great themes. It follows a wizard and a warrior who are enemies, but they become unlikely friends in a battle against a common evil. There's nothing special about the synopsis. It's a middle grade fantasy book and it follows a fairly predictable plotline, which is fine because, again, it's middle grade fantasy. I don't expect some massive convoluted plot. But what I did like about The Wizards of Once was that it dealt with some really difficult themes. It dealt with death and unlikely friends and overcoming obstacles in a very different way, and so I thought that the messages in that book were fantastic, which is why I decided to pick up book 2. However, this book didn't deal with as many great themes, which I could have forgiven it for, but what I couldn't forgive it for was that a lot of the character development that happened in book 1 was completely forgotten about in book 2, and we basically started all over again, particularly with our male character. He was very obnoxious and badly behaved in book 1, and by the end of the book he had started to make strides towards changing his ways. But at the beginning of book 2 he was even worse than he was at the beginning of book 1, in my opinion, and it went beyond, for me, an unlikable character. And I'm a character-driven reader and I like to see character development, so taking that massive step backwards was a real turn-off for me, and I don't think I'll continue with the series for that reason. Then we have The Beholder by Anna Bright, which is sort of a fantasy romance book, kind of. It's about a girl who is a seneschal's daughter, and she will become seneschal when he steps down, but until then she needs to find a husband because she can't be seneschal as a single woman, which is frustrating, and she finds that frustrating and she wants to sort of fight against that, but at the same time she wants to make sure that she is seneschal so that she can deal with those issues from the inside, I suppose. And so she proposes very publicly and is then very publicly and brutally rejected. So she has to travel across the sea to find a husband. And the reason this book disappointed me is because at the beginning we were set up with a really strong female character who wanted to fight against what society expected of her. She was going to do what she needed to do so that she could get herself into a position of power, but she was very much against what her society was standing for. And then she just became like a giggling schoolgirl who was just boy obsessed, and that really grated on me because it was not the character we started out with. She just completely regressed, in my opinion. So again, wasn't a huge fan of that. I might continue with the series and see if she can redeem herself, but jury's out on that one. Then we have Nevernight by J. Kristoff, which is a book that I should have loved and I didn't, and that's why I'm disappointed. It is essentially about a character who goes to an assassin school, which is right up my street. That sounds like something I'd be super interested in, and I liked the plot and I liked the characters and I liked the direction that things went in and the character development that happened in here. I just couldn't get past the writing. J. Kristoff's writing in this is just really not for me. There's nothing wrong with it, it's really well written, it just doesn't work for me. The narrator is very sarcastic and droll, which would be fine if there weren't the additional footnotes. The footnotes are used for unnecessary, in my opinion, world building, things like where a brand of cigar came from, which I just don't need to know that in the middle of an action scene. I really just don't. And comedy that I did not find funny because it's just not my kind of humour. So really disappointed because I could have loved this, but the writing is just so specific. It's not going to work for everyone, and I was one of those that it didn't work for. Next up we have The Invisible Library by Genevieve Cogman, which is another example of something that isn't what it's dressed up to be. So this was in the fantasy section, So I picked it up because it was in the fantasy section, and I read it expecting a meta fantasy set in a library. However, what I got was a mystery crime novel with some romance thrown in, which just wasn't what I wanted when I picked this up. So I was disappointed because I got a mystery crime plotline and I just wasn't interested in reading a mystery crime plotline, and it just meant that I really disconnected from the whole book. This is another one that I probably should have DNF'd, but I just didn't. Next up, We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faisal, which I have done a dedicated review for, so I will link that up above for you, and for that reason I'm not going to go into great detail. It's young adult, and the characters and world and plot were just not set up well enough for me, if I'm being quite frank. That just didn't work in my opinion, and I'm going to leave it there because, like I said, I've got a whole review of this one, so I don't want to bore you by talking about it at length again. These next two, I was in two minds of whether or not to include them, but I think that they were disappointing because the payoff just wasn't quite what I was hoping for. So first up we have Circle of Shadows by Evelyn Sky, which is a Japanese inspired fantasy, which is what I was really looking forward to, and it does have the Japanese inspiration elements that I was looking for, so I did like that. I just feel like it could have been just a little bit more. We follow two characters who work together at what is essentially a warrior ninja type school, and if you're familiar with the term parabatai from Shadowhunter novels by Cassandra Clare, then that's kind of the relationship that we're seeing between these two characters. They're bonded, they fight together, they are best friends, and they're tied to each other in many ways. And they're also pranksters, and they're not particularly taken seriously for that reason, which usually wouldn't be a problem, except for the fact that they've seen something that they have to report for various reasons and nobody believes them. They think that they're just crying wolf, and they're not. So they have to try and resolve that situation on their own, and of course things go wrong. I think that this is one of those books that was like a great concert piece, but you've got ear mufflers on. You just needed the volume turned up just that little bit to be able to appreciate it all the more. So I think I will continue with the series to see if that improves, but I just wanted more from this. I feel like the world building could have been more, the character development could have been more, the plot could have been more. There's so many places that this could go, and I really hope to see that as the series continues. Next up, on a similar sort of vein, we have To Best the Boys by Mary Webber, which is again one of those books that I feel like just didn't deliver what it said it was going to. So the synopsis leads you to believe that you're reading a book about a girl who dresses up as a boy in order to enter a competition which is set in a labyrinth. And that sounds great. Well, what this actually is about a girl who lives in a society that doesn't want her to be what she is. She wants to be a scientist. She wants to go to university. She wants to come up with cures for a plague that is killing the people where she lives. And society doesn't want that. Society wants her to marry someone and bear children and nothing else. So she decides to enter a boys only competition to try and get herself into university, and so she dresses up as a boy to enter that labyrinthine competition in hopes of changing people's minds about female roles in society. I don't know why they didn't put that in the synopsis, because that's the book that we got, and if I had known that that was the book that we were getting, I would have enjoyed it so much more. But because I was told I was reading a labyrinth competition, two of my favourite tropes ever, that's what I was expecting, and we don't get to the labyrinth competition until sort of 80% of the way through the book, which meant that I was disappointed because I didn't get what I signed up for. But had I gone into it knowing that that's not what the primary purpose of the book was, then I would have enjoyed it a whole lot more, because actually the message in this is great. So I will probably reread it at some point, knowing what I now know about it. And I actually include this on this list in the hopes that you will read it knowing what I now know about what this book is actually about, and therefore enjoy it. So that's really the reason I included it on this list, because it was disappointing for me, but it doesn't have to be disappointing for you. And then finally we have The Binding by Bridget Collins, which is another book that is not what it says it is. This book is sold as a fantasy about a man who becomes a bookbinder in a world, or an apprentice bookbinder, in a world where books house the memories that people want to forget. And he one day comes across a book that has his name on it, which means that there are memories in that book from his own head, and he wants to know what they are. However, this is not a fantasy book, and that is not what this book is about. And unfortunately, I can't tell you what genre this book is or what this book is actually about without giving away major spoilers. And I don't know how you get around that, but it frustrated me, because we just took a complete about face about 40% of the way into the book. It wasn't as fantastical as I was hoping. It didn't deal with that premise as much as I wanted it to. So the only thing I can suggest, if you want to read this one, is go into it knowing that that synopsis is just the surface and there's a lot more going on that you're going to find out about. And if you do that, then you'll probably enjoy it. I didn't, because again, I just didn't get what I signed up for. So those are 10 books that disappointed me this year, and hopefully some of them you might actually now want to read and won't be disappointed by. And if that's the case, then please let me know, because that would be fantastic. That's what I really want to come out of this video, is for you to find books based on what didn't work for me that would work for you. That's the idea of this video. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. This is supposed to be a helpful video. So if you end up reading and loving any of these, please come back to this video and let me know, because I'd love to see that. But that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks. Bye.